Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we're continuing with our India series, and India has been in the news lately, obviously, because of what's happening between India and Pakistan. And I think one of the things we'll also be talking with our esteemed guest is about the mutual enemy that both Jews and Hindus, Indians and Christians, obviously, and Indians and Israelis have. And so we're going to talk about what's happening between India and Pakistan, and then also elaborate on how that is related to what Israel can learn from India and what India maybe could learn from Israel. And so we'll be talking with that with our guests. So our guest today is Sushant Sareen. Sushant is a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, India's leading think tank, and he specializes on Pakistan, Afghanistan, terrorism, and the strategic dynamics in India's extended neighborhood. And so you guys can understand from his title how he relates to everything we want to talk about here. So Sushant, it's amazing to finally speak with you.
Yeah, it's good to be with you.
So, Sushant, maybe give us, before we get into the specific questions, where we are today. We're recording on Thursday, the 5th of June. Where are we today with the India Pakistan situation? We're at a sort of ceasefire, but I understand there's an expectation. I think that imminently maybe something also will happen. Where are we right now?
Look, I think things have cooled off for now, but there is a lot of tension in the air, and the tension is primarily because India's new doctrine is very clear that for the longest, Ariel, we've had this kind of terrorism happening in India, what we call cross-border terrorism, state-sponsored cross-border terrorism, which incidentally at different points of time has been sanctioned or at least looked away by the Western countries. Which preach so much to the rest of the world. They've looked away when it did not bother them, it did not affect them, or it was in their interest to look away. But we've been facing this for almost over 4 decades now, and our responses had been extremely weak.
Hmm.
Our responses were not the robust Israeli responses that we see. Our responses were mostly to turn the other cheek, or make a bit of a song and dance, break off some diplomatic contacts, uh, and generally rave and rant about it, but not take any serious action. That has started to change over the last about 10 years. And I think after this current conflict which happened with Pakistan, uh, the government in India has announced a new doctrine, which is quite clear that we are not going to take this kind of terrorism lying down. And if there is any terrorist attack in India, and the source happens to be Pakistan, and I would imagine that the doctrine, because it doesn't specifically name any country, but if it was to happen from Bangladesh, where the Pakistanis are making deep inroads, where the Islamist jihadists are running amok, and this is under the watch of a so-called Nobel Peace Prize winner,
Hmm.
who's the darling of the West. The West has this amazing ability of embracing all kinds of dubious characters and giving them Nobel Peace Prizes. So this is another one of those characters, a complete third-rater, and he has opened the floodgates once again for the Islamists to run amok. The Pakistanis are trying to use Bangladeshi territory to again sponsor terrorism. So I would imagine it includes these countries as well. Uh, and the doctrine is that, look, if this kind of an attack was to happen in India, we are not going to take it lying down. We are going to hit you back. And we will keep hitting you back. We will not climb down the escalation ladder. We will not succumb to any kind of nuclear blackmail. Uh, and that is the new thing. So what that means is that while things have cooled off for now, we will remain on the tenter hooks, because you have to understand the animal called Pakistan. And actually, you guys can understand it much better than anybody,
Exactly.
right? So what happens is that when you hit the Hamas or the Hezbollah, the reaction is not that, look, this is an expensive proposition, we should back off. It's not worth it. The there is this toxic Islamist way of doing things, which says that, okay, fine, you've hit me, now I am going to do more of what I was doing. So we are seeing the first telltale signs of that, because the Pakistanis have this army chief who has now been made into a field marshal after having his ass kicked. But this is another thing. They never admit defeat. Even when defeat
Yes.
stares them in the face, they will proclaim victory. Hamas, for example.
Exactly. The Egyptians, by the way, Sushant, in 1973, the Egyptians still to this day claim they won the Yom Kippur War, even though the whole Sinai was captured at the war from them.
So what happened in 73 was that, yes, they first pulled the surprise on you guys, and then they suffered major reverses. But they will only tom about the first surprise. But the rest of it, they will simply it simply is blanked out of their memories. So we are seeing something similar in our part of the world, where we are seeing these Pakistanis. They are once again trying to openly use these terrorist organizations. Now, a parallel could be, some of the states in Israel's neighborhood, which tolerate, sponsor, uh, allow, turn a complete blind eye to parastate terror organizations or proxy organizations of the state, which are running out there. So we are seeing a similar phenomena where the Pakistani military, because there is no civilian government in Pakistan. That guy is like what? He's like a peon in an office, the prime minister of Pakistan. He can't win an election, he can't do anything. So he's been installed out there to give a civilian facade to this whole regime in Pakistan. So it's the army which calls the shots, and the army chief is an Islamist of the highest order, uh, completely infused with the jihadist ideology. And and his spokesman, his chief spokesman, is the son of what you might call the scientific advisor to Osama bin Laden. His father was a nuclear scientist. The military spokesman, his father was a nuclear scientist in Pakistan, who was then tapped by Osama bin Laden and became a big advisor to Osama bin Laden. He was a bit of a crazy guy because he was doing a lot of fundamental research in how much energy you can generate from jinns, or whether you can pass a camel through a needle. Kind of, that was the kind of scientific research also he was doing. But he was also happened to be a nuclear scientist, and is a proscribed character. Was proscribed by at least by the United States. I'm not sure if he was by the United Nations. His son is today the military spokesman. So you can imagine what kind of a state we are dealing with. Uh, and we are seeing telltale signs of these guys trying to revive, not revive actually, but energize some of these terror organizations that were hit. So we are on the tenter hooks. Who knows what
Sushant,
might happen tomorrow?
Can I just, you are an expert also on Pakistani, I guess, society and what like you said, the military controls Pakistan. There's no real civilian control over anything. It sort of reminds me a little bit about Egypt here, where even when there was a civilian, the most of the country is supported by the army, by the military. Therefore, the military controls everything. But in Pakistani society, would you say that most Pakistanis support these jihadis, or is it sort of like the other countries would say, no, they're Lebanon, they took control over everything. Most Lebanese don't support it. But does the average Pakistani support what they're doing in attacking Indians and attacking Christians and Hindus and all this kind of, and spreading the Islamic, by force, the Islamic faith? Is that something that's supported by Pakistanis?
Absolutely. Look, Ariel, what happens is very often uh, we because we live in open societies, we live in free societies. We think that other people are like us, and do not and are being forced to accept these kind of organizations in the society. Okay, and I think we are deluding ourselves. uh, Look, in a sense, you give the Lebanese example, and I think that's quite appropriate. Now, the Lebanese have a very very free kind of a lifestyle. They are not, the typical orthodox conservative Muslim society. It's, in many ways, it's a socially liberal society. But that's, in some ways, it still is. But that so-called liberalism, that social liberalism, ends the moment you mention the J word, which is the Jew word, right? It all ends there and then. Okay. Some of them will pretend that they are above all of it, that the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians, follow the same traditions, come from the same traditions, people of the book and all of that. Uh, and that is an act, because the moment you start scratching them, it starts come pouring out. Okay. It's the same thing in Pakistan. So on the face of it, you will see islands of people who have a mentality not even of the 7th century, but even before that. And you will have people who will be in the 21st century, and a whole range of people who are still living in the Middle Ages. Uh, and yes, you will see people without burqas. You will see people, partying. You will see all kinds of things. But does that mean that they don't approve of terrorist organizations if it affects them? They approve of terrorist organizations if it affects their enemy or their civilizational enemy. In Pakistan, for example, you will see the same very liberal, so-called liberal, moderate, modern characters, uh, and we've seen them. I think this latest skirmish has been quite an eye opener for many of the more gullible kind of Indians. Uh, what we've seen is the kind of attitudes there are in Pakistan. It comes pouring out. So their liberalism ends where the H word or the Hindu word begins. It ends, right? Some of them, like other part people from your part of the world, uh, will pretend to be above it, but you scratch them and it comes pouring out. So I don't buy this nonsense that the people are being forced to accept it. And there are so many times I've heard people in Pakistan saying that, look, terror organizations like the Jaish-e-Mohammed or the Lashkar-e-Taiba, they haven't done anything in Pakistan. So why are we against them? Which means that these are kosher organizations as long as they go and fight outside Pakistan. But if they fight in Pakistan, then they become terrorist organizations. I don't see how that tells you that this is a liberal society.
Right.
Or
And that also, by the way, is the reason that it's probably good that even if it's not sanctioned by the government there, it's good that India hit the government, Pakistani institutions, because that shows the Pakistanis that would say what you just said,
no,
that it's not.
I'll correct you on that. To say that this was not sanctioned by the Pakistan government, I'm sorry. I used to believe in it one point of time. So I must say that I was just yet another gullible Indian when I started off. Uh, and somebody who was so stupid as to believe that I could actually make peace with these Pakistanis. Uh, but over a period of time, I've realized that this is utter nonsense. It's not going to happen. Number one. Number two, the problem is that, again, when we say that these are non-state actors, there is nothing called a non-state actor unless the state has completely collapsed. Okay. So maybe you can say that in Somalia, which is a completely failed state, has been broken up. Yeah, there are non-state actors or para-state actors, right? You can't say there are non-state actors in say Lebanon. Lebanon is a functioning state, right? You can't say there are non-state actors in Egypt. You can say there are terror organizations in Egypt which the regime in Egypt is cracking down on. That you can say. But in countries like Pakistan, there are no non-state actors. These are actors who work in very close proximity with the complicity and the compliance of the state. So we did make this distinction that we are hitting terror uh, bases and terror headquarters. Um, because we are not aiming it against the government or the military. But the moment the military entered the fray, then we hit them. So now the new doctrine also states that we are no longer going to make a distinction between non-state and state. We club them together. So the next time around, we will probably start by hitting the military,
Good.
which is the head of the snake.
Yes, and I think that's a good strategy. Also, here we kept on making the distinction in Lebanon between Hezbollah and the government, and then the doctrine became, at least saying out loud, the Lebanese government is responsible for whatever happens in its territory, and they've been now cracking down with America's pressure, and since the war there has gone to a ceasefire, Hezbollah has been taking their weapons away with obviously America's support, but still the fact that the Lebanese government is saying out loud, it means it understands, and the incentive for them is that we don't attack Lebanon. So the same thing should apply also with the way India looks. Why do you think
But
that you
I'll tell
said?
you what the difference is. I'll tell you what
Yeah,
the difference is. Um, in the case of Lebanon, you had the Americans come down quite heavily on them and a lot of pressure on them. In the case of Pakistanis, we saw the Americans actually give them a face saver. We saw them give them a way out. And I think, although I'm somebody, and many of us in India, in fact, India is one of the few countries in the world where there is a lot more people who are positive about America than people who are negative about America. Uh, but I suppose, that old adage that if you're a friend of America, then it's worse than being an enemy of America seems to be holding true. And what we are seeing is that the Trump administration seems to have bailed out the Pakistanis, given them a face saver when none should have been given. Their noses should have been rubbed in the dust. They should have been shown up for what they are, which might have had a greater impact than to give them, a face saver and allow them to start crowing about, oh, we brought down a few jets, so that means that we've won this conflict. And so I think one of the big problems which India has faced is the kind of hypocrisy and the kind of double standards that we see in the Western countries, the United States, and even more Europe. And that is something which you probably do not face as much, maybe with Europe, yes, but not as much with the Americans insofar as your region is concerned. And that makes a big difference, because then the Americans hold many of these countries uh, by their shorts and curlies, and can squeeze whenever they want to. So it tends to concentrate the mind on many other things, and changes their attitudes. That does not happen in our case. So we've seen, the Americans not doing anything in the Financial Action Task Force or the IMF or any of the other, financial levers they could have exercised to put pressure on the Pakistanis. They don't do it. So I think those comparisons do not necessarily
yeah.
hold in our cases.
I agree. I agree, and I think, well, with the Europeans, we're facing a lot, and so I think uh, and under the Biden administration, also they put a weapons embargo on Israel. But yeah, I agree 100% that it seemed to me that the Americans just wanted everything to stop, even though without letting you guys finish the job, so to speak. Let me ask you something. We mentioned in the beginning you're an expert also on Afghanistan, and so I wanted to ask you, it seems to me that after 9/11, the Americans used Pakistan as a sort of launching pad for their war against Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. And ever since then, they've been sort of tied at the hip with the Pakistanis, meaning they don't like a lot about what they see in Pakistan. Maybe they have a lot of criticism, whatever. But at the same time, they feel that they need the Pakistanis to help them, be sort of a buffer between now the Taliban, now that they're not there, but when they were there to help them, I guess, fight. Even though we know that a lot of the terrorists were getting safe haven in Pakistan, but how, maybe can you take us a little bit through the the effect that the Afghanistan war had on the ability of the Indians to fight the terror in Pakistan, meaning the pressure the US wanted, I guess, quiet, don't start anything with them, How was that related in the actual situation?
So it was a little complicated. See, let me just clarify. The Americans did not get interested in Pakistan only after 9/11. The Americans and the Pakistanis have a history from the 1940s, late 40s. And the Pakistanis were ready to jump into bed with the Americans, um, and profited from it, in terms of weaponry, in terms of diplomatic influence, in terms of financial assistance. A lot of it came Pakistan's way. And then there have been ups and downs. There have been, crests and troughs, in the relationship between the United States and Pakistan. But the latest round of their cohabitation, if you might want to call it that, started post 9/11. And that also happened because the Americans threatened to bomb the Pakistanis into the Stone Ages. And the Pakistanis suddenly lost their zeal for Islam and jihad and decided that they'll cooperate with the Americans. But what they did was they stabbed the Americans in the back. And I remember that was a time I used to travel quite often to Pakistan. And I remember, and I'm now talking about 2003 or thereabouts, right? When I was told by some Pakistani friends, uh, that the clear instructions which have been given to Pakistani security forces is that, look, if you come across an Al Qaeda guy, don't spare him, right? And if you come across a Taliban fellow, uh, you can look the other way. So this was the kind of ambiguous approach, which is why the American efforts in Afghanistan failed. uh, Basically, it was Pakistani treachery which led to the Taliban victory and the American loss. Of course, the Americans and the Europeans made a lot of mistakes of their own. Now, what happened at that point of time was that it also tied down our hands, because the Americans needed certain bases in Pakistan. They needed the Pakistani route, uh, for their logistics lines to run into Afghanistan. And that became, a compulsion. So, despite the fact that India's relations with the United States were on the upswing, this was, one of those things which neither side completely agreed on. We agreed on the war on terrorism, but we were approaching it from completely different ends. We saw completely different solutions to it. And there were Americans who would very often come to India and tell us that, look, east of India, that is China and the Indo-Pacific, there is a 95% convergence between India and the United States. West of India, which is Afghanistan, Pakistan, and this rest of the region, there is only 5% convergence between India and the United States. Okay, it's fine. So, but that became a bit of a limiting factor, because if we wanted to do something, then that would affect American, interests, because they were in Afghanistan. So, that became a bit of a limitation. And this went on for many, many years. Uh, but I think after 2021, when the Americans abandoned Afghanistan, uh, that compulsion went out of the window. So now, and what we did was that, while the Taliban, we have really no love lost for them, but they are a reality now in the region. And even if we, and we cannot endorse what they stand for, what they represent, it's a compulsion now to deal with them. But to be fair to them, at least insofar as India is concerned, they have so far lived up to all their commitments, which are essentially security commitments, that they will not allow their territory to be used against India. They will not allow any anti-India activity to take place in Afghanistan. And by and large, what we learn is that they have stuck to their side of the bargain, which is why the relationship between India and the Taliban regime seems to be on an even keel. And secondly, I think that old factor that my enemy's enemy is my friend. So the relationship between the Taliban and the Pakistanis have gone south. So yeah, that kind of works well for us. So that is the dynamic which is operating in that part of the world, right?
Sushant, one question that you said in the beginning, that the strategy changed about 10 years ago. So in the last decade, you said. So can I ask you just if the changing of the strategy has anything to do with the fact that in the last decade or so, I don't remember when, the party in control of India changed. Historically, the Gandhi family and the, I forgot the name of the parties. You'll tell me, but the party now is under Modi. Is his party considered, I guess, more nationalistic, more willing to fight for national interests than maybe the other party, which was more on the left, if we try to compare it to America or Israel?
Uh, I think it has something to do not just with the party but also the man. Uh, Look, this same party was in power in 1999. It was the same party. The then prime minister uh, carried out nuclear tests after almost 25 years. Our first nuclear tests were in 1974, and after that, in 1998, we again carried out a series of nuclear tests against all opposition of the Americans, of the West, of the entire world, right? But the guy was a poet. He was the kind of a guy, he was a nice old school politician, uh, a very amiable sort of a guy. Uh, and when in 2001, there was almost an all out war likely to take place. This is shortly after 9/11, when the Indian parliament was attacked by Pakistani terrorists. And then India amassed our entire armed forces along the borders. War was imminent, and then suddenly everything cooled off. There was a standoff about 6 7 months, and then you know the forces separated. But Mr. Vajpayee, who was the prime minister at that point of time, did not want to go forward and fight a war. uh, the personality of the current prime minister is very different. He is not a crazy character who is a warmonger, but he is very clear about certain things, that he that India cannot tolerate this kind of nonsense which has been happening from across the border. Uh, Again, he's not the kind of a guy who will say go and nuke the Pakistanis tomorrow. No, far from it. There will be very calibrated, calculated attacks. Uh, they will they will not there will be care taken to ensure that the escalation ladder uh, is not does not reach its peak immediately. uh, but there is also and this we've seen in this last skirmish, there is also this determination that we will not back down. We will keep escalating if the other side keeps escalating. So, what we heard from top officials in India was, if they fire, we fire. If they stop, we'll stop. Uh, and when we fire, we'll fire more than what they fire. So, I think that was very clear. And that seems to have been internalized in the armed forces. But a lot of this, Ariel, has to do with the guy who is in the top job. If the guy says that, look, okay, fine, this thing has happened, but I don't want military action because there is a nuclear weapons state on my neighborhood, then you can't do it, right? Which is what held us back even in 2008 when the Mumbai attacks happened. And of course Israel is involved in that entire thing, because there were Israelis who lost their lives in that particular attack. And one of the most heinous attacks was on the Chabad house in Mumbai.
I actually was neighbors with the parents when I lived in the U.S. of the rabbi who was murdered in the Chabad house. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and it was brutal, cold-blooded murder. Uh,
yeah,
and
horrible.
the whole thing is recorded, in the sense, at least there's an audio recording of the whole thing. So this is the kind of bastards these sons of bitches are, right now. the thing is that even at that point of time, there was huge outrage. And but the prime minister at that point of time said, no, it's okay. There was the American factor also. The Americans were there in Pakistan. They had their bases. The Afghan war was going on, but that should not have held us back. Uh, and even if supposing we were not going to do something, we should have at least turned the heat so much on the Americans that how dare you allow these bastards to get away with this. But it's the personality of the man who's on the job at that point of time. And this became very clear right from day one. Mr. Modi, when he came into power, was very clear that he would like good relations with Pakistan. So from the first 2 years, 2014 to 2015, thereabouts, he tried enormously to have good relations with Pakistan. But every time he would try and take an initiative, these bastards will come and knife us in the back, right? And I think by 2016 he realized that he's going down a desultory path, and that is when he switched and he said, okay, fine, now we will hit back now. And he is very clear, he's not going to tolerate any nuclear blackmail. He is not going to be dissuaded from doing what is right. And that um, all these infinite calculations which people try and make, he says, look, that is paralysis by analysis. You got to do something, you got to do something, right? And you can't think through everything. So you think bulk of it, but then you have to make up as you go along, which is what wars are all about. You cannot really game a war entirely because there will be root surprises that will be pulled on you. And what matters is what's your staying power and what's your will and determination. And that is something which this guy is showing. And that is something which is now getting internalized within the country, that this is the only way to handle this matter.
Can I ask you something also about Indian society? So we spoke about the Pakistanis and the Americans and the current leader of the country, of your country, but I think I've spoke with a few Indian scholars, and one of the things that keeps on coming up is the fact that India, modern India of today, is very different than it used to be, even you said in 2008. Not just the leaders, but the people are more proud of their Indian heritage. There's more confidence. The country is richer. The institutions are more based. Um, do you think that has to do also with the way people feel about what's happening? So they're more confident in the ability to fight. They're more confident in the ability that they will make a living, that they'll move up the ladder, things that weren't maybe 100% in the past. There's more confidence that India is going in the right direction. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would largely. And I would also say that this is a work in progress. I don't think we're quite there yet. Look, the previous government, the Congress government, systematically tried to psychologically degrade the Hindu mind. Uh, the kind of history we were taught in our schools, the history I was taught before I actually started reading history, it was written by these bloody leftist communist pamphleteers who were being patronized by the state. And that history was only about how the Hindus got their asses taken for 1,000 years. The the resistance, the fight back, uh, the refusal to submit, uh, the fact that we are one of the few societies in the world which managed to hold on to their ancient culture and civilization despite 1,000 years of slavery, uh, is something which was glossed over. I think that, and that was a sentiment which has always been there in the community, but it was suppressed. It was politically incorrect. If you spoke about it publicly, you could not be in the media industry and say something. You would be cancelled. This fucking cancel culture, which has now started coming in the West, has been in India for very long, and the leftists are past masters at this cancel culture. So if you were somebody who did not subscribe to the leftist ideology, uh, you were cancelled. You could not work in the media. It was difficult for you to survive in government. You would not get a government job. And if you got a government job, you would not get promotions. Uh, Academia was full of these characters. So you can imagine this was a complete state capture. And it'll take time before you get rid of it. Now, when you start getting rid of it, then you do other stupidities also, which means that you get some of people who should not be there. How you are going to be teaching what is the history you need to be teaching the right history. Okay. And by right history, I don't mean right wing history. uh, you need to be teaching proper facts. You need to ensure that culture is one thing, science is another thing. You don't mix the two. If somebody can find a convergence, well and good. But a lot of it is mumbo jumbo which comes in, which I think we need to avoid as rational people. So there is a lot of things which might be happening, which probably are problematic. But I suppose this is also how things evolve, that when you are swinging from one extreme, you tend to go to the other extreme before you come back to the center. I think the space we need to focus on is the center. And you can then, be a little left of center or a little right of center, but you can't be this woke nonsense which is happening all over the world, or this leftist bullshit which we keep hearing. And you can't go on the other extreme also, because that's also equally stupid. It can be. So I think there is that tussle which is going on. There is, it's a bit of a tug of war which is going on. But the larger point which you make is that yes, Indians are far more confident. Uh, you know, I don't know how much it holds true for the Jews, because you have gone through your own civilizational traumas. But it certainly has been true for India that even when I was growing up, uh, we were not a very confident people, really. We always felt that the white man is superior. The Muslim invader is a much more ferocious fighter. If you actually start reading proper history, you'll see the kind of ferocity with which they have been resisted, and the fortitude with which they have been resisted. But there was this whole thing. Uh, there was this thing that we cannot be world beaters. uh, if we wanted to play in a cricket match or in an international tournament, I remember the general refrain in India used to be, "Damn it, we are so unlucky. We've been put in a pool which is really tough. So getting to the semifinals or something is going to be tough." You don't hear that shit anymore. You have a bunch of. I see my own kids. They don't give a shit about what anybody thinks about them. They know that they want to go and be world beaters. They want their place in the world. They are not going to take anybody talking down to them. They will fucking hit back as hard as they get, right? So there is certainly this confidence which is coming. There you will, again, when this confidence comes in, you probably sometimes go on to the other extreme, and you will see some of it. There are manifestations of that even when some bunch of Indians travel abroad. But you will see a certain amount of confidence which has certainly come in. uh, it is a function of a society evolving. It is a function of a society being much more confident about itself. It is a society which says that, look, I'm going to be a world beater. If I'm playing cricket, I want my team to be the best. I'm not going to crib about what pool I am in. I don't give a shit. I have a chess player who's a world beater. I have 500 other things which I am doing better than anybody else in the world, or as good as anybody else in the world. And yes, that does not mean that I am the repository of all the wisdom in the world. I must, and which has been part of traditional Hindu philosophy, that we must march in step with the rest of the world. There will be evolutions taking place around the world. We need to be part of it. We need to embrace it. We need to absorb it, keep what works for us, reject what doesn't work for us, but move in step with the rest of the world. So that is another attitude which has come. And I think that again, that has been traditionally been an attitude in India. So we are rediscovering a lot of our heritage, a lot of our confidence, and we are ready, to march confidently into the future.
It's very nice, and I think that it's good for the West, meaning the West is losing its confidence while Hindus and Indians are gaining it, and you can be a counterbalance to the crazies. Uh, so that's just my feeling. I want to ask you something that is you're expert in terrorism in Pakistan, Afghanistan, which is basically it is all Islamic terrorism, and India itself is one of the countries with the largest Muslim population in the world. How do Indian Muslims feel about, you think, in general, about what's happening with terrorism? Is there a fear that Muslims in India, or at least sections of the Muslim community, will support this, or is that not something that's not even on the table, you think?
So, uh, Ariel, you have to look at it in the context that one, the Indian Muslim is not a foreigner. He hasn't, he's not like the French Muslim. He's not like the German Muslim, okay, or the British guy. These are people who have been here, but these are 90% of them are basically local converts, okay. Uh, but of course, the convert tends to be even much more Islamic than the people who come from the Arab world. Uh, but look, even within Islamic societies, there are two broad trends which are visible. There is a trend which is led by people like the Saudi Crown Prince, people like the UAE, the MBS and the MBZ. These are people who have shown a new path. Again, many other countries also in the Islamic world, uh, which which are saying that no, we need to march in step with rest of the world. Uh, Fundamentalism and this kind of Islamism, jihadism is not the way forward. And these are people who hold a lot of influence in the world. And then, of course, you have the other crazies like the Pakistanis and others. Okay, so there are these two broad trends even within the Islamic world. Now, in India, one, you have to understand that these are not aliens in India. These are not people who've maybe 2-3%, and they also have come about 300 years back. So these are all Indians. These are not foreigners. These are not aliens. They are part and parcel of our culture. Uh, and that is a very big difference in terms of attitudes. Secondly, I think the Indian Muslim also gets affected by what happens in global Islam. So it's not as though the Indian Muslim is completely untouched by what happens in global Islam. But I think the Indian Muslim also, by and large, again, it's a
Yes,
generalization I'm
in
making.
general terms.
Yeah, in general terms, I think the Indian Muslim also has a dual approach on many things. Uh, their approach, for example, when it comes to Israel, they would tend to side with the Palestinian side, or the more Islamist kind of side, without taking into account the fact that in Israel there are about 20%, 25% Muslims who live, who enjoy equal rights, who go to universities, who prosper, who are part of the IDF, part and parcel of your culture, right? Part and parcel of your state. And that is glossed over, but the entire focus is on what happens in the occupied territories, or you know Israel's very robust postures on terrorism. So there is that part of it, and then there is this part that, look, if there is Islamist terrorism coming from Pakistan into India, that's not acceptable. We don't accept it. These buggers don't speak for us. So there is that attitude as well. So for want of a better word, call it schizophrenic, call it bipolar, call it what you will. But you will see those differing attitudes among the Muslim population. Uh, Again, within India, there is a section of the populace, Muslim populace, which has been affected by radical ideas. I think denying something like that would be stupid and delusional. So they have been affected. There are, again, but when you look at it, we have what, 180 million or thereabouts Muslim population. Uh, at best, you had about 150 or 200 people joining the IS. Okay. Uh, you hardly have maybe a handful becoming part of the Al Qaeda. Very few have become part of international or Pakistani based terror groups. Very few, maybe in the few hundreds at best. At best, uh, there have been some cases where there have been local terror groups which are linked to some of the Pakistani ones, which have mostly been busted. And again, they are busted because a lot of the information comes from within the community. Uh, so there are people who have been affected by this particular
But it's
ideology,
very small, you're saying. It's like
but
nothing.
it's small. uh, but again, so okay, let me put a certain layer to it. One is the guys who actually go and carry out terrorism. Then there are the guys who profess a very radical ideology, okay, which is like a step lower than terrorism, but it is like the ladder to terrorism. And that is again a problem, and that is probably a much larger subset which we have seen. And then there is a whole lot of other people who are probably very orthodox, conservative, but want to live their own life. And of course, there will also be a small percentage of people uh, who are very liberal, very modern, uh, who are Muslims, uh, but have absolutely no issues on assimilating with the larger reality. So there are different realities, different layers at which the Indian Muslim community operates.
Sushant, can I ask you lastly before we go? Um, I am from New York originally. Ever since October 7th, maybe even before, but I didn't notice it when I was there. But after October 7th, we've had literally protest outside my former synagogue because I moved to Israel since. So, but where I grew up, there were people that were coming, especially because it was a very big synagogue. It's a anyone who knows Chabad 770, where the rabbi was. So it's this big place. Protests coming outside a synagogue, people being punched in the face for being Jews. We just had in Washington D.C. two young people worked for the Israeli embassy, were gunned down by a pro-Palestinian person who pro-Palestinian for me now in these specific instances also means anti-Jewish. We've had in Boulder, Colorado, an Islamic extremist firebomb a protest, a get together of people who say they want the hostages to go out, not like violence. They just want the hostages out. Boulder, Colorado is a very left wing city. It's not somewhere where you have these right wing extremists. But he decided because he didn't like Jews, he filmed himself before saying how much Allah will be proud of him. And so we've had, and in Europe, I don't even have to say, about an uptick of people, anti Semitism, but let's just anti Jewish. People just want to kill Jews all over the place. The one place I haven't really heard of, there's not a lot of Jews left in India, but on the other hand, even in Europe, there's not a lot of Jews left. And you have places with zero Jews, but anti Israel extreme, with extremist language against Jews in these protests. In India, I haven't really heard about that. And when I've spoken to people, they said, no, there's really no people in India like Jews. It's like, so what do you think is the general attitude towards Jews in India?
Okay, so first on what's happening in Europe and the United States and other parts of the world.
Hmm.
This because we see it happen with the Hindus also. This whole business that we are opposed to the Zionist, we are not opposed to the Jew,
Exactly.
is a fucking dog whistle. Okay, let's be very clear about it. Uh, they think that the moment you say Zionist, your anti-Semitism becomes acceptable. It's the same thing in with the Hindus. I am not against Hindus. I am against Hindutva. Half these assholes don't know what the fuck it means, what exactly the philosophy is, the ideology is. They don't know.
Hmm.
But it's a convenient dog whistle that you want to say to the Hindus, but you would say no, no, because that's not politically correct. So I will say Hindutva, that this is a political ideology. So one is that, and this has been allowed to happen in the West, uh, I think deliberately, by at least the leftist, the
Hmm.
woke constituencies. Incidentally, in which the many Jews involved in it have been
Tell me
responsible for
about
it.
it.
There are many Hindus involved in it, and most of these idiots don't understand that these are useful idiots for the other side, because it is always convenient to fire my gun at Jews using Ariel's name,
Yes.
right? I can fire my gun from your shoulder at Jews, and I can say, look, this is a Jew talking about it. It's the same thing with the Hindu. That I want to carry out a campaign against the Hindus, I will bring a Hindu on the thing, and then I'll ask him to abuse the Hindus, right? And it becomes kosher.
Hmm.
So one is that part, what is happening now in India. Again, I think uh, we had a small Jewish community. We still have, but it's minuscule. But look, one is the basic Indian society. We don't believe in any one God. We don't believe in any one way of thinking. For me, if what works for you, you're welcome to it. What works for me, I'm welcome to it. There are many paths which lead to the same reality. You have chosen your path. I am comfortable with it. I might not agree with it, but I think you are also aspiring to that same goal which I am aspiring
Hmm.
to. Incidentally, one thing which many people in the West, uh, or in monotheistic faiths don't understand is that even in Hinduism, uh, there is the philosophy of there's only one God. All that we say is that there's only one God, but God manifests itself in many, many ways. So you pick up whatever way works for you, right?
Hmm.
Because ultimately you're planning to, your spiritual growth is a certain direction. So, uh, one, because of that philosophy, uh, which is ingrained in Hinduism, the Jews were never a problem. You had your own faith, you were practicing it, it didn't interfere with anything I want to do. I didn't have a problem. Nobody, why would I have a problem with it, right? Uh, so one was that factor. It's a very diverse, pluralistic kind of a faith, Hinduism. So every stream of spirituality, faith is acceptable. It's not a problem unless you become a problem for me and tell me what I should or should not do, and that then becomes a problem. So one is that. The other thing is, there is a certain amount of sympathy for what has happened to the Jews uh, over history, and I would suspect subconsciously, at least, there is a certain amount of affinity that, okay, fine, we also suffered something similar.
Yes. The same
We
enemy.
did not have a diaspora like you had, uh, but I think in terms of what we went through, uh, and there are some history books which claim that the kind of genocide which took place of the Hindus under these Turkish invasions which happened, because initially it was the Turks, not so much the Arabs, who came in, and the maximum number of massacres were also carried out by the Turks.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's the Turkish word is the Turk, as we are called. It's a four-letter word.
Mm.
in it, among many Hindus. And increasingly, thank God for that asshole Erdogan. He has once again
Yes.
revived those memories that what these Turks are all about. Uh, but so one is that factor that there is a certain affinity of, maybe you can call it, of the victims. Uh, so that is the second. And the third is there is great admiration for Israel,
Mm.
not just on Israel's uh, intellectual and technological accomplishments, but also your grit and your determination on how you have protected yourself against a sea of enemies. Uh, your robust responses, your ability, Mossad, for example,
Yeah.
Israeli intelligence. So there is a deep-seated admiration for everything that Israel has managed to achieve, and I think that is another factor uh, which makes the Indians very accepting of Israel and of Jews, uh, and perhaps this is one of the reasons why there's so much of tourism which comes from Israel to India.
No, I also think that the tourism is because they love India, not just the Israelis love India. I think also. When I was in the army in 2008 to 2011, everyone that was, and I was in Golani in the fighting brigade. Everyone that I knew said, when I get out of the army, I'm going, because it's conscription, so you have to do
Yeah.
almost 3 years. Now you have to do more because of the war. They need more soldiers. But everybody said, when we get out, we're going to India. It's like, so we have this like natural. It's interesting to understand why. Another thing that you said, and I'll just finish with that, is about the Hindu religion that doesn't want to make people be Hindus because everyone has their own way.
Yeah.
The Judaism is the same thing. We are not a proselytizing religion. When people come to want to be Jews, the first reaction that the our halacha says is tell them that it's not worth it, go away, and only if they insist. So the same thing. There's sort of the Islam, Christianity are very proselytizing. They want everyone to be Muslims or Christians, and both Hindus and Jews are not proselytizing. So there's the affinity between we don't want to make you Jews and you don't want to make us Hindus. Now we can sit at the table and talk with each other about whatever we want and we're okay. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that every culture should learn from. Just don't force yourself on. If people want to be part of you, good. If not, we're okay. And Sushant, I want to say that I learned a lot from our conversation, and I would love to have you back when and if things turn out differently or what's happening, if there's new developments on the ground. And when you're in Israel, you are invited for Shabbat dinner, so we'd love to have you. And thank you so much for
Sure.
being with us today.